The typical nihilist's defense handbook includes many tricks. Some examples to help you recognize them when you come across them. Example: mock humor. When cornered intellectually, the nihilist will begin feigning exaggerated mirth, expressed by laughter, a nervous convulsion. Laughter is a form of ridicule with no content. No content need be provided afterwards. Example: mock indifference. When cornered, the nihilist will feign exaggerated boredom expressed by yawning as a form of ridicule and dismissing what he implies he knows all too well. The only thing he knows well is the response to a position he is unable to contradict. He knows he is unable to contradict it. Therefore, he feigns boredom to escape the need to contradict it, to escape his position. His contact with the position is accompanied with the established response to it, which is given to him. Example: personal insinuation. Before he falls back to the easy and the usual ad hominem counter-argument, he will resort to subtle insinuation concerning the opponent's personal life and or his motives. A female or an effete male obsessed with sex will go straight to the sexual innuendo. He wants to dissuade and to hurt by going for the weakest, most central part he can recognize in himself. In other words, what is more known to him, what he understands the most. Once the seed is planted that the other's motives are questionable, all other nihilists will seize the opportunity to ignore or to dismiss the opposition without having to offer any response, any reasoned argument, any reason at all. The nihilist will question the other's motives, being unable to justify a position without an emotional return. He accuses it of an alternative motive and then summarily dismisses it on those projected emotional grounds. Example: negative as positive. The absence of an absolute, in this case the absence of absolute knowledge, omniscience, absolute certainty, is for the nihilist a reason enough. When what is proposed satisfies a need, adheres to an emotional requirement, he sees in the absence a way of maintaining his own positions. When they contradict his personal needs and cause a negative emotion in him, he finds in the absence a reason to dismiss. In the latter, he can excuse all lapses in logic and evidence, no matter how glaring, whereas in the former, they become inexcusable, no matter how small. In the latter, he defends, expecting the other to offer the same in return, whereas the former, he remains stringent, unforgiving, critical, and aggressive because he receives nothing, he expects nothing in return. For the nihilist, there is no gradation in value judgments. There is only an either-or based on the projection of absolutes, based on binary dualistic thinking. Uniformity in weakness and ignorance is sustained by this either-or paradigm. Uniformity in hierarchies to the point where they are eradicated altogether, creating equality, is sustained by this either-or scenario. It is the negative in this case, the absence of an absolute, that justifies the equality of all. The nihilist relies on the absolute nil to find hope in the coming absolute singular oneness. If paradise is absent, the coming utopia is on its way. If God is dead, then he is imminent. Example: dissatisfaction. For the nihilist, emptiness, boredom, unhappiness is always an either-or proposition with no levels. One is either absolutely happy or absolutely unhappy, and since he has himself as the only example he can draw from, he assumes that because he is miserable, and because happiness in the absolute sense is highly suspect and improbable, that all share in his own misery. Therefore, for the nihilist, ambition, hope are the only source for his contentment. He must draw from the imminent, from the coming, from the future, from what is just around the corner but never here, to gain sustenance and strength for dealing with his misery. Because the past is forever blocked to him, he has already dismissed it, so he only has the future to draw from. For him, comfort, resulting in a lower grade of activity, is incomprehensible. He can only make sense of it by referring it back to his own condition and see it as unhappy. For the nihilist, not wanting to change so as to preserve an already present state of relative contentment is beyond his capacity to relate to. He is always driven towards change, taken by change. He must always change himself because he is always unhappy with himself in relation to the world. The world is changing on its own, but for the nihilist, it's the world that is static, and he who must change. For him, this striving towards is the only source of potential contentment, because he can find none in the present or the past. He seeks it in some coming future. Example: self. The nihilist is so dissatisfied with himself, with the end result of a historical becoming, that he must search for gratification in others. He despises himself so much that any distraction from self will do. He is so void of anything to feel proud of, to find meaning in, to find purpose. His past so disgusting to him that he uses the term as an insult against others, such as primitive, passé, old, that he must find hope for something more, something to fill the void, either in some coming future and in some otherness, in some other person. The other becomes his only source of self-worth, and so he must always please others, be validated by others, find value in others, measuring his own worth by how many others find him valuable. For him, an activity is only important and worthwhile when others appreciate it, and he gauges this by how many of them do so, quantity rather than quality. He is so dependent on others, the immediate otherness, for his self-esteem and for dealing with reality, that the mere possibility of separating self from otherness makes him feel terror. For this reason, the nihilist can only see illness in whomever is not like him, or he finds in the other a motive like his own. In other words, attention whoring, as a form of constant self-validation. He always finds others to be the whores that he is. His own emptiness, seeking constant fulfillment in others, becomes for him the new standard of the healthy, and he calls this love, and he must purify the concept by detaching it from nature, from the past, from the ego, from anything self-serving. He must deify and sanctify it. Example: dependence. The nihilist is more dependent on others than the average mind would be. It's not only his stunting of growth turning inward, his retarded development, keeping him in the condition of infantile neediness, suckling on the communal teat, which is to blame, but it is the discrediting of the world that closes him off from anything that would lead to maturation. Once the nihilist has had his own senses demeaned, all he can do is turn to other minds for guidance. Once he can't even trust his own senses, the senses of another must do. Atrophy over time does not only further strengthen this dependence on others, but it also makes the senses incapable of what they could when they first developed. He has had his sight, for example, so ridiculed and slandered that he began to mistrust his own eyes. He blinded himself. Now, after years of blindness, he is unable to see anything but shadows, which only reinforces submission to an ideal that makes sight irrelevant. Now blindness becomes the new health, to not see, to not discriminate, in other words. He now goes to the other eyes, the other's eyes, to tell him what he must see. Their motive he never questions, nor does he doubt their intent. If they tell him exactly what supports his own state, what flatters him, what makes him feel good, what turns the world into something desirable, something noble, something to be proud of. When blindness is made into something to be proud of, then he loves the one who tells him that. Nothing he sees, nothing he hears, nothing he feels is to be trusted. In fact, he is told that it's all an illusion, it's all superficial. And to take notice is to be shallow. The word is the replacement to his senses. Comfortably blinding himself, feeling safe and secure in the sensory deprivation chamber of his own mental panic room, the nihilist either turns esoteric, shunning the world altogether, or he turns towards the only other source of stimulation, of data input, which is left to him, and that's other people. And how do you communicate with other people but through language? Esoteric, in this case, means towards the communal decree, the shared belief, the popular conception. He turns inward because esoteric, in the sense that he now confuses the world of man, the artifices man creates for the real world, the one existing independent of human intervention and contrivance. The fact that he can now pick and choose which source he will attach himself to, suckling it dry like a baby on a breast, makes this solipsistic sacrifice all the more seductive. It's not that there is a reality we must discover and deal with directly, but now all he needs to do is give himself over to relativity, to perspectivism, and find that appropriate perspective for him, the right parent, the correct parent, the most motherly mother. Cocooning for the nihilist is not a cost. It is a benefit, a privilege. He can buy any shell he wants and then crawl into it forever. Technologies for him are God's embrace. He engages what he calls reality through these motherly kinds of minds, or, if he dares, in a moment of bravado and testosterone-induced courage, he may take a peek at the more fatherly, cruelly loving types. Direct contact with the world, crawling out into the sun from the proverbial cave, the Platonic cave, is not possible in theory. Is only possible in theory, excuse me. What he calls the outside, the real world, is no more than part of the artificial shell that surrounds his delicate mind with comfortable lies and well wishes, and reasons to turn his shame into pride and his blindness into a new kind of sight, a newfound enlightenment. Example: independence his independence becomes a form of dependence, but detached from the world which cares not for the delusions he has grown accustomed to. He is not liberated, but in dependence. His freedom is reality. His freedom in reality is a freedom from reason and an emotional attachment, a freedom from the past, a freedom from nature, and an attachment to human codes, to human words, to human abstractions, a freedom from reality and an attachment to human artifices like justice, like equality. Words to be redefined, purified, concepts to be detached from nature. The reasons why these concepts evolve as survival tools must be cleansed away. The motive has to always be selfless, has to be divine. His rejection of reality becomes a full acceptance of the words he is given after they've been deified, cleansed of all primal, natural, base intentions. He has detached, liberated himself from the vulgarity, the indifference, the uncertainty, and cruelty of the world, and totally submitted to the cocooning, maternal embrace, whose motives are never doubted, and words suffice to create a feeling of bliss. A child forever clutching at his mother, and the mother having no other motive but the selfless giving. There's no self in the mother. The mother becomes this ideal, this abstraction. She has no ego. She's not a person. She's an idea. Any attempt to explain these words, these human abstractions, by referring them back to the natural world from where they sprung from via the human brain, is considered a vicious assault upon the innocent child, cruelty against the naive. The word, if it is to serve as a detaching code, must remain sacred. It must have no traces of anything natural, anything motivated by the animalistic, the earthly, the worldly. The word, the mother's lullaby, is meant to soothe, to relax, to relieve stresses, to save and to protect. Isn't sex also used as a stress relief once the purpose has been eradicated? Not even a father's harsh directness will be tolerated in this children's room. The nihilist wants to annul the world outside of this beautiful setting, this technological embrace. Everything is possible here, even reinventing your sense of self, your identity. In other words, your past. Example, either or. No matter how above primal dualisms and nihilism thinks he's grown, he will always revert back to their simplifying grace when he is faced with a dilemma. The nihilist litmus test is the proverbial glass half full or half empty choice, this either or. The choice must be made to reveal the psychology of the thinker who, being forced into the choice, must choose, using his innate predispositions to guide him. The fact that fullness and emptiness presuppose a bounded space-time, as represented by the glass, is far too diluting for the simplifying test of contentment to be effective. For the nihilist, the choice is easy. The glass is always half full, expressing his happiness and the fullness he feels when focusing only on the liquid, which promises to quench his needs. Need directed by emotion, desire, in other words, is how the nihilist directs his reasoning and his value judgments, such as they are. The nihilist will always focus on the quenching parts of reality, ignoring everything else. For him, the liquid contained within an artificial boundary, excluding all else, suffices to remain happy in his selective perceptions. Example, the word. The spoken and written word is, for the average nihilist, the ingredient constructing, sheltering, cocooning metaphors. The word is The word is the fabric that binds him and protects him from the world. Against the world he has the word, though it be love, happiness, Jesus, marks, equality, fairness, justice, unity, oneness, humanity, as the binding words which have evil, discrimination, injustice, suffering, fascism, Nazism, Hitler, Nietzsche, as the rejecting words. We have binding words and we have rejecting words. We have words that pull towards us and words that push away. The words used define the shelter being constructed and its relation to reality. There are words which try to attach human conceptions to reality, to nature, and then there are words that try to detach man from them. The motive can be discerned in two ways: by how the word refers to a sensual phenomenon or differs to another human construct, and by the usage of the word itself, its place, its repetition, its emotional appeal, the imagery it produces and has been attached to the word. The more detached from reality a word is, the less it refers to the sensual, but refers to other human constructs. The more void of substance it is, the more empty it is. We live in a world full of empty words, which we just cast about like love, friendship, and they mean nothing because they refer to nothing. The words themselves need not be precisely defined. Actually, not defining them precisely makes them stronger in their emotional application. But they must be shared under the auspices of not only a common dictionary offering the word's basic meaning, but more importantly, under the authorities which lend the word gravitas, associated with an emotion, an image, a construct, but also place it within a narrative. Once the word has been emptied of all references to reality, has been made shallow, it must then be given a new definition which fills it. As such, the nihilist thinking always goes through these narratives offered by famous, established, institutionally acknowledged names, a name also being a word associated with a being, a face, which may or may not be present, to accept or to reject the usage of his name and the narratives associated with it. The world is of a secondary affair because all goes through words. The senses, already reduced to a cosmic lie, a trick only there to fool the nihilist, have also been surrounded by concealing man-made constructs, particularly in urban environments. Urbanization is the growing environmental condition and conditioning, and nihilism prevails amongst the bourgeois raised within urban environments. For the nihilist, all opinions of the world, of this fluid, dynamic, indifferent to human words and constructs reality, must pass through narratives associated, justifiably or not, with famous human figures which are narrators of reality, using words. All conceptions of reality, now pushed into the distance of experience, must fall within established storylines. This is the convenient factor in the nihilist psychology, because once reality is reduced to words and narrations, it can be manipulated, it can be purchased and sold, it can be accepted or rejected according to need and according to personal taste. It is now a product to express personal tastes. The original unyielding to human needs in different world has now become a word more easily manipulated and used. The reduction of reality as a sensual experience to a word, a conceptual construct, begins with the creation of the word God. At that point, The fluidity, dynamism, and certainty of reality is linguistically formed into a static, absolute symbol. From then on, the overturning of reality by using words becomes easy, particularly amongst the nihilists who have the least to be grateful for when it comes to their presence, their appearance, their reality. The words are not symbols for expressing reality for them, symbolizing and representing it, but little strings to be woven into a new skin, a new layer, a new garment, loose enough to include anybody, and strong enough to exclude the cold harshness or all the unwanted aspects of reality.